Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Purpose Tuned podcast. The goal of the show is to create valuable content to broaden your knowledge, inspire you to act, and get you in the right mindset so that you can apply it in your own life to drive impact, generate meaning, and achieve your purpose. Now, today's guest is Paul Glover. Paul is the no bullshit workforce performance coach, a recovering trial lawyer, an ex-felon, an unabashed Starbucks addict, a Chicago Bears fanatic, the author of WorkQuake, a speaker on business and leadership topics, and a member of the Forbes Coaching Council. Paul, thank you for your time, and let's check in. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. I really appreciate the opportunity to be talking to you, Tom, and to your audience.
Yes, I'm excited. So let's share a bit more about your background. How did you get started in your work in executive coaching?
Well, actually the coaching career is probably my fourth. You actually went through the list, and thank you, of the iterations of Paul Glover. As I started off as a union organizer when I got out of college, became a labor and employment lawyer, managed to get myself incarcerated for 5.5 years. And after I got out, I was seeking a career. And practicing law was no longer an option. And so I looked at my experiences, and I believe that you take I like Frank Sinatra's, he has a saying, he says, don't hide your scars, you've earned them.
Mm.
And as I looked at my scars, I said, these are valuable scars because each one of those scars represents a lesson. And those lessons, I think, are important for people who are business leaders because often they have the blind spots that I had and the same level of arrogance and hubris that I had that makes them successful. But it also can lead to their downfall. And so as I thought about starting a coaching career, I took that comprehensive life and those experiences and I put them together in a coaching program. And that's the No B.S. workplace performance coach. First, as a union organizer, you have to be very persuasive. You have to be able to communicate with people on a level that they understand because union organizing is a tough business. But as a lawyer, you develop a very highly tuned bullshit meter because I never had a client who would tell me the truth. Clients aren't prone to do that because first they want you to like them, and second they want you to believe them, and they think that if they tell you the truth, you're not going to either like them or defend them as you would if you thought they were innocent. I never thought my clients were either innocent or guilty because the story they told me was 50% of the real story. And at the trial, the other 50% would come out, and at some point I would be able to now assess the information, the evidence, and make a decision. But so having that very highly attuned bullshit meter allows me to coach someone who's in a high position, president or CEO, vice president, the C-suites, and be able to ascertain very quickly whether or not they're bullshitting me. And my job as a coach is to call out the bullshit. And by the way, that's something that most leaders do not have much experience with. By the time you've gotten to a position, a high position in an organization, you find that people are not going to tell you the truth. They're afraid. And second, they don't think you'll like them. And third, they found out that telling people who don't want to hear the truth does not usually come with a reward. It comes with retribution. And so when I'm hired, I'm very clear up front that I'm being hired to tell my client the truth. And they can either accept it or not. And by the way, the truth comes to me through what they have to say to me. It's not that I know something no one else knows. If I did, you and I wouldn't be talking. I'd be on my 100-foot yacht in Fiji. But I found that I can listen to what people have to say. And I also do objective evidence going to outside people, their management team, for instance. And through 360-degree reviews, I can collect enough information to make a decision. So I took that experience, and then I tied it into the last major chunk of my life, and that was 5.5 years in prison.
Mm.
Because I found that, and there's some interesting studies that show that CEOs and serial killers have very similar personalities. And so I was the guy that thought that I was the smartest guy in the room. Nobody was ever going to be able to outsmart me. Nobody was ever going to be able to take me down. I had so much hubris and pride that I very much resembled a successful corporate executive.
Mm.
And of course, I found out very quickly that that level of arrogance eventually will do you in. And it's amazing to me that two things happen. First, we all have our blind spots, and successful people, interestingly, have more blind spots than most because becoming successful forced them to focus very narrowly. Because in most organizations, you have to narrow your focus and pick out the one or two, three priorities that are going to make you and your organization successful, and you don't look at the rest. Right? You are that focused, and that drives you to success. The most difficult people for me to coach are successful people because the first thing they say is, well, why would I change? And by the way, coaching is all about change.
Mm.
If it's not, there's no if it's not, it's just an interesting conversation.
Right.
And since I am a performance coach, if you engage me, we're going to put together a process that will move you from where you are to where you tell me you want to be.
Mm.
And we're going to make that change happen. And we're going to do that because of our relationship and because of my type of coaching. My type of coaching is an acquired taste. Most people do not like it and they end up not wanting it. But I make it a little bit more interesting because I base half of my compensation on my client, and I reaching the outcome.
Mm.
So think about this. We've sat down. I know something about you. We figure out we could be a fit when it comes to communication, and we establish a goal together. You're going to tell me what you want to achieve. I'm going to tell you whether or not I think that's reasonable under the circumstances. But if we agree on a mutually acceptable goal, we're then going to put a process in place that's going to move you from where you are with my assistance, not my help necessarily, but my assistance. There's a difference. I'll explain that to where you tell me you want to be, because I'm going to take you at your word until you prove to me that you're lying.
So,
So
so,
go
so your
ahead.
point earlier, you said you want to help people uncover their truth, or that, when you discover what their truth is, the conversation changes. So what's the process around that? Like, how do you get people to share more of themselves, or to seek out that truth? Like, what's your concept, your processes?
Well, first you have to tell me that you want it, because I have to feel a certain level of commitment from the other side, or this is not going to work. Now, you can lose that commitment later, but you tell me you want it, and I believe you. I do a couple of things. We do 360-degree reviews with your team, the people who report to you. And as an anonymous source that is not liable to tell on them, to rat them out, using prison vernacular, snitch them out, you'd be surprised what people will tell you. They will tell you the truth about someone else. They won't tell you the truth about themselves. Based on that collection of information from that 8 or 10 people that are direct reports, I will put together the results of a 360. Then I'm going to give that results to you. And that's going to be our objective basis for the beginning of our conversation. Let me give you the easiest one. Most successful people believe that they're tremendous communicators.
Mm.
In reality, people guess at what they're trying to tell them. They think that you should have telepathy and you should know what they're thinking, not what they're saying. So the results of the 360, one category is about communication from the leader. When we get that information, they're usually shocked. They just can't believe that people rate them so lowly when it comes to not only speaking, but listening. Most successful people are not good listeners. So I take that information and we now have a conversation about, first, do you believe it? Because if you don't, you need to tell me why this objective evidence is not valid. But if you tell me that you do believe it, or you start to see it, right? Now we have this blind spot and I'm revealing the blind spot. We're going to have a conversation about that. And if you see the blind spot or start to, then we're going to start to work on resolving the blind spot. We're going to put together an action plan. We're going to work on your communication style. Normally, we're going to work on your listening skill set.
Mm.
And we're going to have steps because I'm an action guy, I'm an action plan guy.
Right.
And we have steps. And by the way, you now have obligations to fulfill the step. So every 2 weeks, we're going to have a conversation about what the homework was for you to work on improving your listening skill set.
Mm.
And in that conversation, you'll tell me one of three things. One, I decided I don't care. Now, that's usually going to be the end of our relationship. But by the way, I've had people who do that. They suddenly realize that it's too much work.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're going to tell me you did it. Fantastic. You get my hugs. Or you're going to tell me you didn't do it. Now, remember, 50% of my compensation is based on our getting to the agreed upon outcome. And you've agreed to this action plan.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I believe that if a coach doesn't have skin in the game, and to me, skin in the game is not just my attention, it's my money.
Mm-hmm.
And if I've got 50% of my compensation resting on you doing what you agreed to do, I'm now going to be not your coach, but your accountability buddy.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to have.
I love that concept of accountability because so often when people come to coaches asking for some sort of changed behavior in themselves, they don't want to do the hard work. And so having an accountability partner really helps with that. And so can you walk us through, like, what does that look like? Like, how do you get people to be accountable for a behavior that they need to change? Is it something that they have to acknowledge that it needs to change first and that they're willing to change? And how do you work around leaders that do not want to change, but are coming to you looking for, I don't know, something different?
Well, and so I'm pretty harsh about this. I believe that smart people come to a coach because somewhere in their psyche, they know that they have to get better.
Mm-hmm.
No one comes, if I were to go to a person, by the way, that's why my business is all referral. To reach out and try to touch someone who hasn't decided they need to improve is a terrible waste of their money and my time.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes pretty obvious in the conversation. Our introduction goes to that. Are you committed? When I talk about commitment, I need to actually hear it.
Mm-hmm.
I need to hear that you are committed to change. That now starts our conversation. Then I'm going to show you that the reason you want to change is not only will it improve you, but your improvement will improve your organization.
Mm-hmm.
And normally that's what people want to do. Good leaders are looking to always get better because it helps them, but then it helps their organization. That means you commit. And if you commit, then we put a dollar sign on that.
Right.
And we go, that's the cost of commitment. And by the way, I will not accept you not doing your work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not going to do it.
Right. So that's great stuff. You touched on how your work is not for everyone, and you have a unique perspective to executive coaching. Can you share with us how your background has changed you in a way that makes you different from other coaches? For example, you talked briefly about being an ex-felon, right? And so, what was that experience like for you? And when was the transformation? What was the aha moment for you? And all of that leading you to executive coaching?
Well, first, again, my personality is on display for anyone who has 5 minutes of conversation with me. And when I went through the trial, and I had two trials. First trial was a hung jury, and the second trial I was found guilty. I received a sentence of 7 years. And there is an opportunity under the federal sentencing guidelines to get a reduction in your sentence. And that reduction comes from an acceptance of responsibility. So you need to stand in front of the judge. Now, remember, you've already been found guilty.
Mm.
You need to stand in front of the judge and tell him out loud that I realize that I am responsible for this crime.
Mm.
And I'm telling you right now, I apologize for it. I show remorse. I need to let everybody know how bad I feel about this. And they'll give you a reduction, 18 months.
Mm.
I stood in front of the judge and he said, do you accept responsibility? And I said, absolutely not.
Mm.
So I had, see, so when you think about how ignorant, arrogant that is,
Mm.
to know you're going to prison, to leave your family, my wife, my two kids, I'm going to leave them. I'm going to add an extra 18 months to my sentence because I would not admit after I'd been found guilty that I was guilty.
Mm.
So I go to prison. And for the first, now I'm serving 7 years. I got, with good time, I'm getting out in 5.5. 2 years into my prison term before I recognized my responsibility for why I was where I was at. The first 2 years I spent with revenge fantasy.
Mm.
I wanted to get even with everyone who had testified against me, the federal prosecutor, the judge, everybody but me
Mm.
was responsible for what had happened to me. 2.5 years in, and by the way, at that point, I read some philosophy, I started reading religion, and 2 years in, it finally, my blind spot was revealed,
Mm.
that I absolutely was responsible, that I had inflicted myself, self wounded me,
Mm.
and at that point, my attitude changed completely. Because at that point, if you carry that attitude with you, it is negative, so dark that it's just self-destructive. It's self-destructive both mentally and physically. And so you need to come to realizations that you bear responsibility for things that are happening around you and to you. If your organization has a bad culture, it's the leadership that you look at first.
Mm.
If you are, if you just don't have any empathy, you're not a caring person for employees. That takes a toll on the organization. But it's all about the character of the leader. And it took me 2 years. I only signed 1-year contracts because I figured out that it'll take me 1 year for someone who really is committed to move themselves to a position of transformation or change.
Mm.
And it works, but it's hard. And you said it earlier. People are all about wanting to get better, but they don't want to do the hard work, and it is hard work to do the transformation.
Mm.
First, you have to admit your issues, your blind spots, and people hate that. They don't want to. They keep thinking there's some way around it. There's no way around yourself. You cannot escape yourself. I
Right.
couldn't, but we try all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who said this, but there's a quote out there that says, change is hard, but once you get through it, the destination is beautiful. And um, it, we have a culture that is built on, I think, I don't want to say weaknesses, but being too soft and sensitive. And we need to find ways to have people tap into their inner strength and provide them with the tools to create this change, having the courage to do so. For example, talking about the concept of vulnerability, a lot of leaders that I've worked with view it as a weakness. But if you really think about it, and through research, and even through Brene Brown's work on the power of vulnerability, it's actually courage. It takes a lot of courage to tap into the space, and people they they cover it with things that don't really matter to avoid that that feeling that they think is considered weakness. And so um, I really enjoyed the fact that that you shared this story about your personal experience being in prison and what that meant. What was what was behind that character at that time? I mean, like, what was your childhood experience like? Like, what made you that person at that time, that arrogant, um, um, you know, person that didn't want to admit to defeat? Like, was there some sort of personal trauma that you went through, or what was that?
Well, yeah, I came from a broken home. And my mother and father, actually, my mother was married 7 times. My father was married 6. They married each other twice. My home life was dysfunctional at best. And my father was an extraordinarily powerful guy, big man, blacksmith by trade, and mean and tough. And my mother was just wacko. And so I started trying to figure out how I could belong.
Mm.
The problem is if you don't have, and by the way, this is something that not only children, but employees need. You have to have an example. You have to have someone that you will imprint on you. We're always looking to belong. When a new employee comes into an organization, they're trying to figure out how can I belong, or where do I belong in this organization? And because of my dad and who he was and how he behaved, I decided that not only was I going to be smart, but I was going to be tough. And being tough to me was, I say I was a bad guy wannabe. And I hung around with mobsters. I mean, the labor, I was in the labor movement, and that's notorious. Not now, but back then and in my day was notorious. And I enjoyed that lifestyle. I wasn't married at the time, and I hung around with guys that were just bad and criminals. And I never quite crossed the line. Well, let's put it this way. Obviously crossed the line and went to prison, but I didn't cross the line into the violence that was a part of that culture. But yeah, so I moved from that childhood seeking to belong and wanting to be around guys like my dad. My father was not a mobster or a criminal, but he had that in him. And I was attracted to it, and it did me in. There is something to be said for who you associate with.
Right.
You need to be very cautious about it, because you may not see your weakness or blind spot, but I guarantee you that type of person will. And they will help you exploit it to their benefit and your detriment. And by the way, I'm not a dumb guy. I wasn't dumb then. I'm not now. I absolutely knew that the relationships were not good, but I also knew how much they felt like something good to me.
Right.
And I paid the
Yeah.
price.
So you mentioned about about belonging, and so many of us, especially during this pandemic, has a need for belonging. Our relationships have been hindered because we don't go out much anymore because of COVID, and there's this piece that's missing, and we want to, get back to this normal state where we can associate with our normal friends and belong in a community, and even the workplace as well too. In the space of diversity, equity, inclusion, and there's also a piece of belonging. When you have organizations that create an inclusive environment where people can bring their authentic self to work and belong, then you create an innovative culture, which helps um, the growth of the business. And so,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
and no, it's okay. And so this concept of belonging is important, and it even starts as early as when you're a child. And I do agree with you that your childhood experience, as well as your parents' role modeling behaviors, really shape us. From our early days to adult. And so I can empathize that someone like yourself who grew up in a difficult environment, how that shaped you. Looking back, are there any regrets you have, or is there any, like, what did you learn from all of that? And how does that tie into your sense of purpose and meaning?
Well, first, if you're not learning from your experiences, you might as well be dead. And we had an interesting conversation in prison about exactly that. The premise of the discussion was if you could be put into a cryogenic state and your prison time would be like one day when you woke up, but the time that it actually passed, of course, was the years that you were sentenced to. Would you do it? And my answer was no, because I knew even in prison that the opportunity to learn and experience was there. And it also is, and let me take a step back to what you said about the pandemic. And by the way, I absolutely love socialization. Like anybody else, I want to be around people and enjoy their company. But I also believe that we don't take enough time for the reflection necessary for us to know who we are. Mm-hmm. And if you don't spend that time, and I'm not advocating everybody go to prison for 5 years so they can learn who they are, but I do know that we are so attached to the noise around us that we don't put boundaries up that force us to seek quietude, to start to reflect on who we are and why we're doing what we're doing. I talk to so many people that are in toxic jobs where the organization doesn't care about them, and yet they're afraid to quit. They're staying for the money or the status, the title. But the reality is that their well-being matters more than that. And I just had that conversation with a CFO of a $500 million company. And in my coaching with her, the last 3 times we had a session, she burst into tears. And I said, you need to seriously consider leaving. This job is hurting you mentally and emotionally, but she couldn't go. She could not leave because the status and the money. People sometimes need to be given permission to quit. And we are not a society that honors quitting. We want you to continue to bash your head against that wall, regardless of how much pain it's costing you. And so a part of my process, and with her, she did finally quit. It was taking too much of a toll. But that reflection that you mentioned, that you mentioned the loneliness, and I know that there's now a term for that. We're all languishing. And my contention is, well, I don't deny the I guess the feeling, but I refuse to accept the fact that you can't do something about it. And I believe that requires that you understand yourself more fully so that you can take the correct action for your life. If you're not willing to do that, you will not live your life to its fullest. And I came out of prison understanding myself and what I was about. By the way, I'm not an alcoholic, and nor do I profess to understand alcoholism. But I do know that if you're an alcoholic, you should not go into bars. Let's not do this testing thing, because that's stupid. And I figured out that if I hang around with the wrong people, I am susceptible to temptation. So I choose the people that I am friendly with, the people I spend time with, very carefully. I want them to be a part of me in a different sense than it was before. When I got out of prison, I had some of those same people who approached me because they knew I wasn't going to be able to find a job as a lawyer, and they wanted to offer me employment. And it was like, I appreciate the offer. I have absolutely no intention, respectfully, of accepting. So to me, we have to be on a journey of discovery through our entire life, or it's not worth living. If we stop, then you cannot evolve. You cannot be better. And with an executive, the same thing. But you seem to be touching on that, and I would agree with it. Socialization is fantastic, but at some point you need to pull back to make sure the socialization is not hurting you, is not stunting your growth. It's amazing to me how many people don't want to see someone else succeed. And you've got to look at that and be cognizant of that. Sometimes we're very blind when we look at our socialization and those we socialize with, because we make some assumptions that may or may not be true. Right. And you need to examine those periodically, just like you examine your employment relationship to make a decision about whether or not it's time to move on, which may mean quitting.
Right. So I love that. I love all of what you just said. Sharing about the story with the CFO that you worked with. really the show is about purpose. It's really how do we get people to tap into the space where they can really be fulfilled. And I don't know what the statistics out there, but it's large that Americans are not satisfied with their work, and too often we have people working in jobs that they hate. And so the show is to empower people to tune into their inner self, reach that truest, highest calling, so that they can really bring more of themselves out to the world, the gift that they have, the talents, the abilities, and share it to the world. And we have creativity in us, and we have gifts that people value and cherish. And so, too often those gifts and gifts are hidden from 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 our colleagues because we don't want to show that side of us, and therefore we end up hating our jobs and hating ourselves, and that leads to you know, a low confidence. It also leads to an negative impact on our health. And so I'm glad that you're able to share that story of that CFO who you were able to, after doing some coaching sessions with her, able to get her out of this mess so that she doesn't further destroy her you know her well-being. You also mentioned about if we're not growing, then we're not what's the meaning of life? And I believe that people who are purposeful, who lead purpose-driven life, are those that are continuing to grow, are seeking new ways to better themselves, to evolve. And so, with that said, what inspires you to wake up every morning to be a better you?
First, you don't appreciate. I don't. I don't want to generalize. You don't appreciate what you have until you don't have it.
Mm,
And I want, for people to take things that they have so lightly is irritating to me. I didn't appreciate freedom until it was gone.
mm,
And I was so happy to have it back. And it's just the simple things. Every morning I start off with gratitudes because I need to remind myself about how good my life is. And it's the interaction with other people that bring me joy. I actually have 45 people in my coaching program now. And most coaches are like, oh my God, you can't possibly be a good coach for 45. And my response is, well, it depends on the 45. For instance, I'm enjoying this conversation. When we get off, I won't feel exhausted. I won't feel drained. In fact, what I will feel is a sense of energy, that we're transferring energy to each other in this conversation. And that's what I do in these coaching processes. I don't need someone who doesn't want to be in the process. I don't need someone who doesn't want to be in my program. I'm okay with that. If I'm not your coach, find someone. It's all right with me. I'm not for everyone. But I do know that those that stay in, when we have an hour conversation once every other week, we exchange energy. I believe that if you don't laugh or smile in our conversation, it's been a failure.
mm,
I think the humor and the opportunity to laugh at ourselves and not take ourselves so serious has got to be a part of who you are. And I find that as long as I've got the relationship with someone, that we trust each other, that it's reciprocity, it's not one way. And if it's reciprocity of transfer of energy, if we know each other a little bit, by the way, my mantra is I care, but not overly.
mm,
Because if I overly care about you, I can't coach you.
mm,
But I have to care enough. I have to have empathy for you as a human being to understand the trials and tribulations that you're dealing with.
mm.
And I tell people, because of all of those that I have dealt with, many self-inflicted, I have a completely different perspective about examining somebody else's. So that's what I get up in the morning to do. I get up in the morning thrilled to be able to do what I do. By the way, it's not as good as practicing law. Let me tell you, but that's gone. That went away. And I accepted that fact. I love practicing law. I was a great trial attorney. But every day I get to interact with people who have committed to themselves and to me that they will become better.
Mm,
And I'm telling you, if you can be a part of that process, it doesn't get any better than watching somebody get better.
right.
It's thrilling. It
Yeah.
really is. And second, I get paid. It's like, it's a win-win.
Yes, yes, it has to be a win-win. I love your mindset about only working with clients that love working with you, and creating a win-win situation is key to business success and life success. Love that attitude, love that mindset. We're about that time, Paul. This has been a very enjoyable conversation. What last few words or advice would you give to my listeners as it relates to purpose?
First, I don't think purpose comes to you. I think you go find it. That may mean that there's some dead ends. Doesn't mean you should stop looking. I think that we're easily discouraged if we don't, we expect it to leap out or leap on us. We're going to recognize it when we see it. I don't believe that. I believe that we look for purpose in our lives, and we may find it in some strange places. So you never want to be a bystander in your life. You
Mm,
want to be moving down a path. I think that action is important. Momentum is important. Otherwise, entropy sets in. And entropy is actively working against us every day. It's just the nature of our life. And if we don't keep moving, if we don't keep searching, looking, we're that kind of animal. And we need that continual movement until we find what turns us on, what energizes us every morning. I've been fortunate to do that several times in my life. And then we take that and we make it blossom so that it helps other people. Again, I don't believe that if you find your purpose, it shouldn't be about you. It should be about you and others. And if you can do that, you'll find your life, regardless of where you're at or what you're doing, suddenly blossoms.
right.
And you can't, I wish I could inject everybody with the feeling I had the first day I was out of prison, because that's when the realization of how full life is
Mm,
just was on me. It was that revelation. And I'll give you a quick story because in the morning, 5 o'clock the next morning, I'm at home. I'm going to go down, and the judge is hopefully going to reduce my sentence. It's going to be instant release, right? I've still got a year and a half to serve, but we're going to go through the sentencing process, and I'm taking my case to the Supreme Court, and I'm going to get a sentence reduction. But it's not going to happen until the next day. 5 o'clock in the morning, I get up. My wife is asleep, and I go and I reach in her purse. I pull out a $5 bill. Now, I haven't touched paper money in 5 years, right? And I walk outside my house, freedom, right? Because normally I would be in a bunk waiting for the guard to say, count is clear, you can get up, right?
mm,
So here I am. I open my front door. I walk outside. I get a $5 bill, walk downtown, and there's a Starbucks. It's been 5 years since I've had a coffee. I
wow.
go in, I order the coffee. She says, wow, you're the first one of the day. And she makes it. She says, now, I'm not sure how good this is going to taste because it's the first one. And I said, believe me, best coffee ever. That was freedom. So I wish everybody could just imagine how good that cup of coffee tasted to me and make that a part of their daily life. And I guarantee you this world will be a much better place.
Paul, you show such a sense of deep connection to your inner self and your learning of what life is all about. And that's what this show is really about. It's really about getting people to realize that life is greater than what we think. And we often live in a box, and we believe in certain thoughts, and sometimes these thoughts are negative thoughts, and we have to find a way to get out of this matrix and realize that life is beautiful, that there are positivity all around us. And it's, how we choose to think of life that's gonna shape who we are. And just those simple moments of you buying that coffee and having that sense of freedom and say you're alive and you get to live another day and you get to explore all that life has to offer you is so beautiful. And too often, and I'm guilty of this as well, we take things for granted, simple things for granted. And the power of gratitude is so important. And I've been incorporating that into my daily practice. And I'm very happy that you have as well, and that you have a sense of meaning in it.
Yes.
And what really upsets me most is that there are too many people lying in their dying deathbed, and they're saying, these are the regrets that I have. I wish I could have, should have. And I don't want that for people. I want people to live out, their truth, their truth, their highest calling, and be fulfilled. Do what makes them happy. Do what makes them feel more joy, experience more love in the world. And I hope that by having simple conversations like how you and I are having on the notion of purpose and meaning and what that's all about, that I hope that we can create a community, a culture of purpose-driven people chasing after fulfillment. Because as Tony Robbins say, the greatest failure is having to achieve success only to be unfulfilled. And we want people to achieve success and also be fulfilled. And so it looks like you beautifully have indicated that through your work. And I love this time, and I love you being who you are, and just sincerity and the honesty um, and the emotions that you're connected with your inner self. Um, I so thank you for being you. If people want to find you and connect with you, either through your work or just want to learn more about who you are and what you're all about, where can they find you?
It's Paul at paulglovercoaching.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn at Paul Glover. And, I tell everybody, first, I respect what you're doing here. And what I would say to anyone listening that wants a discussion or a conversation is contact me, and we'll schedule 15 or 20 minutes to talk, because I really truly believe that I'm blessed. And a part of that being blessed is to give back. And not everything has a price tag. Not that I don't like my money, but I also know that given an opportunity to help somebody else with an issue or a problem is part of the give back. And so any of your listeners that email me, we get 15 minutes, we'll schedule.
Great. Awesome. Well, folks, if you want to connect with Paul, you know where to find him. Thank you so much for listening into this episode. And please do subscribe and spread this episode widely with your friends and family on social media. I appreciate all the support. Again, this is the Purpose Tuned podcast. And thank you for listening.